Welcome back to Tech, Tesla and Trends. Tonight we're going to discuss how the Earth and the Moon are related to climate and why this ties into the ideas that Elon is discussing of making humanity multiplanetary, and also how it ties into the need for transitioning the Earth, all of the Earth, and its power use to a sustainable format. This is high level. It's not meant to be detailed. If you want to learn more about any of the topics we're discussing here, there are hours upon hours of videos that you can dig into on these topics elsewhere, done by people with far more ability to talk down into the weeds. This is looking at it from an overall 10,000 foot level here. So the four things we're going to particularly hit today are seasons, tides, orbital forcing, and also the impact of the moon on climate and weather. So tides are the first place we're going to hit. And if you're unfamiliar with why we have tides, it's because of the moon. To some of you, that's going to be obvious. Maybe to others, that's news to you. But as the moon orbits around the Earth, it causes a bulge to one side or the other. And it pulls the water, and as it flows, that's your tide. And that comes in and out as through that cycle. Now, why does this matter? Because it is part of seasonal change that occurs. So the moon, as you get towards those equinox and all the other part of that, we end up with spring tides, and those are the highest. And you get your lower, and then you get your lower tides that occur twice a month during the full and new moon phases, while your neap tides, which are the least extreme tides, and those occur during the quarter moon phases. So these changes are occurring all the time. If you live near the ocean, you see that flow and that ebb and flow as it occurs. The aspect of how that impacts our overall ecology and weather is, as the tides are significant in how they impact the marine ecosystem and coastal communities. They influence the distribution of nutrients and organisms, and as well as shaping the features of our coastlines. And as you think about that, you can see that, yes, obviously the tides, they're part of this. But the tides, they exist only because we have the moon. And that is an important thing to keep in the back of your mind, because seasons start playing into that as well. And those are due to how the Earth's axis is involved. So the tilt of the Earth's axis causes the seasons, and different parts of the planet receive varying amounts of sunlight throughout the year. This is pretty basic. That's why in some parts of the world you end up with very clearly defined summer, spring, winter, fall type seasons, whereas in other parts you end up with very non-traditional winters, summers, and that's typically due to how much sunlight's actually able to hit the Earth in their area. There are parts of the Arctic and Antarctic that will have all day and night daylight, and all day and all night night in their winters. So this is part of the things that the axis brings to the Earth and the change. This isn't trivial from our perspective. When the Earth's axis is at its most extreme, as it was about 20,000 years ago, it can cause large-scale changes to that whole atmospheric river that's really dropping lots of stuff, white stuff in California, Nevada, all of that. It can impact that whole creation or those weather streams as well. But it impacts the atmospheric circulation and ocean currents, and can lead to a wide expansion of ice sheets. And this is important to keep in mind, because ice sheets across, they were literally across the upper portion of most of North America, all the way down into the middle of the United States. Canada was completely covered. So it's not an insignificant impact that this tilt, as it changes and shifts. Our weather is very much tied to that process as well. As you look at that seasonal distribution of precipitation is due to that tilt of the Earth's axis, and it can also result just as easily in the super cold as in severe droughts, floods, storms, and significant impacts to the overall ecosystem of the ocean and everywhere else. This impacts, obviously, the plants and animals as well as human society. Yet one of those other threads for making humanity multiplanetary. Because some of those are more impacting to humanity than they would be. Obviously, they're going to impact everything else, but our ability to survive as the human race would be greatly impacted by the next ice age. Not so much by the global warming everybody is fearful of. Yes, it has an impact, but it is not what the science fiction films try to predict. Anyways, that's a whole different conversation, and there's a body of evidence out there on that. Looking at the next item here that's really important about, or that we have to understand here, is that the moon has a stabilizing effect on our seasons and that axial tilt. It prevents the planet from experiencing too much of that large and erratic change. So without the moon, that wobble could be, or that shift of the axis could be really entertaining and not in a fun way. And the weather patterns are impacted in that, not only in the short term, but in the long term as well. This is one of those items where we as humans don't have a long enough lifespan in order to truly gauge and be able to understand it as well as we need to. And then looking at how the moon and the Earth's climate impacts seasonal changes, the moon plays a critical role in moderating the Earth's climate. That's like I was saying, that stabilization there. It's very important, and it really does have an impact on humanity, whether we've paid attention to it or not. And the reality of it is, we really have not been paying attention to that particular portion of it. Ultimately, this is what supports life on this planet in many ways, is that stabilizing impact. Orbital forcing is the next item that we're looking at, and that's orbital forcing is more of a long-term cycle that occurs in the Earth's orbit around the sun, which can cause an effect. It's the amount of solar radiation that is essentially hitting the Earth. That's what I was kind of talking about, where some parts get more, some parts get less. as this occurs, it can cause the Earth's climate to change. And there are parts of the North that had nothing. They were completely covered by a glacial sheet. And then there's evidence that it was also a jungle at one point. So as you look at this, it's very critical to understand that this cycle, though long in its rotation, is impacting the Earth every day. We just don't have a sufficient time view to understand that impact. And sometimes we attribute things, or I should say misattribute things where they should be. Now, looking at how this works, this is roughly about an 18.6 year lunar node cycle. It's that gradual shifting in position of the moon relative to the Earth's orbit around the sun, which, the timing and intensity of the tidal patterns is what you find going on there, as well as influencing weather patterns and other climate phenomena, such as what California and Nevada are impacting or feeling right now. As we also take a look at some of the other impacts here from orbital forcing, the moon's gravitational influence can impact the climate and the weather patterns. That's not something that's new, but it is something that is not mentioned very often and not discussed in any regular detail anymore, which is somewhat part of that whole political conversation that we've touched base on throughout, that some of this information is purposefully not being conveyed because it does not serve the agenda that is being pushed by one party or the other. I have a real issue with science that is paid for by organizations expecting a certain result. Well, that's a whole nother conversation, but that impacts. That's part of the problem that we're seeing here and why some of this information is not as widely available in our public school systems and also within some of our, even at the collegiate level. Moving on. So how does this impact? It absolutely impacts the overall amount of temperature and the precipitation, ocean currents, and some of the more important ways which orbital forces or forcing can impact the Earth's climate. Obviously is part of what we discussed last time with the Milankovitch cycles and the long-term variations within the Earth's orbit and axial tilt. That all impacts the amount of solar radiation that we receive. Now, right now, the sun is particularly active, and we are going into a period where that activity is going to increase. This is going to definitely impact how much radiation, i.e. heat, is being introduced into our system. This matters for the Earth long term. And a lot of people are trying to point fingers one way or the other and ignoring the impact that this entire system has on it. You cannot point at one particular item and say, this is the only thing causing a problem or introducing heat into this system. Heat must be accounted for, and it will then be handled one way or the other. That's one of those frustration points that I see within this whole conversation about climate change, is that it tends to ignore the entire picture. And that is a significant detail that I feel must be addressed within this particular forum. And part of the reason why I think Elon is very keen to make humanity multiplanetary, but also to transition our energy production and creation away from fossil fuels and into more of a sustained pull that energy from the sun, which is available. And it's really amazing how little land is required if we actually did it right. And that's part of what Tesla's vision is for megapacks and larger scale utility grid operations. And if you're not paying attention to that part of what Tesla's doing, it's important that you take a look at where they're going in their utility side. As we look at this, we can see that there is overall impact from the moon and the orbital axis and overall position of the Earth in that system that impacts our weather and our overall climate. And it is very important that we, as humanity, are not only paying attention to where we're at and identifying where we're at in that particular cycle, but also utilizing the combined amount of knowledge and resources that we have in an effective fashion. Much of what we do is like flailing around in the dark and missing the boat because we are not even looking to get on board with working together. And this is an important thing that we need to learn to do, not just from a nation perspective, but also as a world position. Individually, we need to learn to work together rather than trying to rip each other apart because we have different political views. That serves no purpose other than the one that those in power are seeking to push. Think about that as you consider some of these topics. Part of what is going on is purely political. And we need to be aware of that as we consider this climate conversation. Now, one last thing, sort of a Steve Jobsian one more thing. The moon is slowly moving away from the Earth. It's about 3.8 centimeters per year, 1.5 inches for those of us traditionally trained in the United States. This is due to that tidal friction, and the Earth's rotation is causing it, it slows down slightly over time and transfer some of that orbital or that rotational energy to the moon, causing it to move further away as it goes. While this process is very slow, so it's not like you need to worry that the moon's going to fly away in your lifetime. This is a millions of years sort of thing. But it is something to keep in mind. As it moves further away, this will continue to impact our climate, the climate of the world in new and diverse ways. Part of that where it will have significant impacts on the Earth's climate and will be obviously the tides. Some of them will lessen. And then it also will lead to a change in the length of day. And some of the other astronomical phenomena that will become increasingly rare or much more common, and much to our chagrin in some ways. So it's really important that we pay attention, not just to the words climate change and the Greta Thunbergs of the world that are severely undereducated. I'm sorry, Greta, but you're severely wrong on just about everything you open your mouth on. Go back to school, learn something for real, and then participate in society for once in a positive way. Your version is not the only version. You need to work with people to build rather than to destroy. This matters. very much to the world we all live in and inhabit. Now, looking at where we're going in the rest of this series, there's the next portion that I'm going to be touching base on is why long-term trends matter in our short lives. Sometimes we will never see the impact of a particular activity. Now, that's a popular line within the climate conversation. But are we actually understanding it in a way that actually matters? Not for us, but for our children and our grandchildren and their grandchildren and their grandchildren. For me, that matters. I know to some of you, the population of the world is one of your big problems. That's another conversation yet to come, and we'll go into that one more. So, looking at it overall, I encourage you to share this with those like-minded or even those that are going to severely disagree with what I have to say. Share, and let's have a conversation down in the comments. I'm willing to talk to just about anybody, reasonably. That means keep it polite. Names don't need to be called. Use science. Use reason. Use logic. These things matter more than emotion. They always have, and they always will, because they produce results. For now, have a great night. We'll talk to you a little bit later.